Hello, I'm Rupert Soskin.
And I'm Michael Bott, and it's time for another Prehistory Guys interview.
Yes, it's time for another interview, and this time is with one of those people whose name comes up time and time again beneath the archaeological news headlines.
Ain't that the fact? As archaeologists become more and more reliant on remote sensing techniques and data to gain new insight into what lies beneath, it's not surprising that Professor Vince Gaffney MBE, one of the pioneers of the use of GIS, magnetometry and other technologies in the field of archaeology, should find his name mentioned in the news as much as it is.
Most recently, of course, his name is attached to the discovery of a circle of massive pits in the Stonehenge landscape surrounding the henge of Durrington Walls. More of that later. But to give you a sense of Professor Gaffney's achievements, I'm just going to read you a couple of sentences from his profile at the University of Bradford. It reads, Professor Gaffney has received national and international awards for his work, including the 2013 European Archaeological Heritage Prize awarded by the European Association of Archaeologists and the Queen's Anniversary Prize for Higher Education. His work on inundated marine landscapes received the 2007 Award for Heritage Presentation at the British Association for the Advancement of Science. His book, Europe's Lost World, was awarded the Best Publication Prize at the British Archaeological Awards in 2010. In 2017, his work at Durrington Walls received Best Research Project Prize, whilst in 2018 he was awarded an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Awards for services to scientific research. He's been integral to the Stonehenge Landscape Project and Stonehenge Hidden Landscape Project, and his ongoing work on the submerged landscape of Doggerland beneath the North Sea will continue to teach us about our Mesolithic ancestors for years to come.
I think it's fair to say that the use of remote sensing technology in archaeology today was born from Professor Gaffney's pioneering work in the 90s. And as you just heard, his portfolio of achievement is really quite remarkable. So we're very honoured to be able to present this conversation with the man himself. We hope you enjoy it.
So, Professor Vincent Gaffney MBE, may we call you Vince?
You may.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Now, your career is so far-reaching in so many different ways, and to be honest, we really struggled to shortlist things we actually wanted to ask you. But first things first, basically, what started you off on the road to archaeology, and was Newcastle anything to do with it?
Yeah, well, going to a school that was actually on top of Hadrian's Wall was a starter for 10. And, from my very earliest age, even my junior school used to take us out to the Wall and places like, Housesteads, Chesters, the Mithrium, places like that. And my secondary school was actually on top of the Condacum Fort, and it's recently been pulled down and doing an excavation underneath it, so it came to a good end at any rate. And, I had a grandfather who was massively interested in history and archaeology.
Yeah. Okay.
So, there was always a certain degree of encouragement there. Whether I was going to do it was something else. I mean, I wasn't a model student when I was at school, I have to be honest. And it was a rather rushed decision as to whether I'd go into archaeology or spend the rest of my life doing what I was then currently doing, which was night shift in a bakery in South Shields. So, it was a toss-up. I think I've made the right decision. Never sure. But,
where would the world be?
A better baker.
Okay. I have it that you got on to a dig on Vindolanda.
Absolutely, that was great. And when I was at my secondary school at Rutherford Comprehensive, in my fourth year, they took us out for a week or so in working at Vindolanda. So I met Eric and Robin Burley, which was absolutely remarkable. Eric Burley, actually, great historian, actually paused as I was walking up from the railway station to get up to Vindolanda at one point, and gave us a lift to the site. I sort of knew who he was, but it was only in later years I actually understood just how significant he was. But working on that site was wonderful. Mainly I was on the area that they thought was a brewery, which is also quite fun.
Oh, right.
Okay.
But I did have a chance of assisting on the areas where the tablets were coming out of. So I saw some of those in an early stage, which was wonderful. And the site is great, and I do keep going back. And it's somewhere everyone should go to. It is a wonderful archaeological site in a wonderful archaeological landscape, and it's not the wall.
Yeah,
it's a Steingate fall, which makes it just that little bit more interesting. So,
I know that your career really blossomed, when you went to Croatia. Is there anything you want to say about your earlier career, though, before you set off?
Well, in fairness, that's I would hope that there was a little bit before, because that it was about 10 years.
Yes,
in between.
Exactly.
I mean, I went to Reading, and had great, which was fantastic, Richard Bradley and Mike Fulford and
amazing,
and such people, and it was very, very small year. I think we had 14 people in the year, which was absolutely fantastic. The most of the staff actually, people like Richard and Mike, were not that much older than the students at that time, of course.
Yeah, right.
And it was a great opportunity to get to know such fantastic archaeologists pretty well. And you had lots of opportunities digging at Silchester, South Lodge, places like that. When I left university, I was also lucky in that I'd been working with Julian Richards, Meet the Ancestors fame, who had been digging a whole series of round barrows for the Berkshire Archaeological Unit, introduced me to the wonders of Chalkland prehistory and lardy cake, which was because that does keep you through the worst of the excesses of digging barrows. And these were barrows with large antiquarian holes in, and at least one of them with badger sets you could hide in when it rained. So this was wonderful. And I moved with Julian down to Wessex Archaeology, Wessex Archaeological Trust, as it was, when it was first formed, and and immediately to work on the Stonehenge Environs project, which was a great introduction to survey and landscapes. Working there, really gave me an insight into Stonehenge, and has allowed me to go back time and time again throughout my career. So I owe that to Julian very much. I mean, also to Julian, that I nearly died doing it after we picked up an unexploded rocket-propelled grenade not far from Durrington Walls. And you soon find out who your friends are when you're holding them. But Julian gave me a lot of good advice about getting away from him very quickly and putting it at the side of the field with a few expletives. But that was wonderful. And the field walking side, the surface survey, was something that I really learned to appreciate with Julian. And again, something I've gone back to throughout my career. The ability to go beyond the site and to see and to set things into much greater, greater context.
Yes,
was critical. And it was also, of course, at the point in time when we were beginning to realise what off-site archaeology actually was.
Goodness, yeah.
How it could add to the archaeological record. There was a consequence of that my next move was to work with a guy called Martin Tingle on Roman villa settlements on the Berkshire Hills. So we moved back for that. And the practical outset of that was that Martin, Mog as he's known as, Mog and I did a survey looking at whether you could reconstruct agricultural economies on the basis of the surface survey evidence. And at that point in time, I have to point out, I had become a Roman pot analyst.
Okay.
So,
Didn't know that. Okay.
That's what I was doing. And at one point, I had about 60,000 sherds in my flat, which I was gradually processing. You could do that at that point in time. But again, that allowed us to have a very different perspective on the archaeological record, landscape, links to surface data, as well as archaeological sites. And the Maddle Farm project, which is what it was quite an interesting project in terms of Romano-British studies at the time. It was also bloody good fun. I had a great time doing it as well. After that, there was a slight stalling in my career on account of the 1980s, the Tory government, the impact on archaeology, whether there was any future in anything. And I'd moved up to Bawdsley Abbey and was working with Philip Ross and Grenville Astle and Sue Hurst, Sue Wright, and I was working simply on a manpower services scheme, excavating the Gatehouse Chapel at St Stephen's, and I got an opportunity to get out of archaeology for a while and into the local museum. Now, you may not know, but Bawdsley Abbey is in a place called Redditch. Redditch in the 19th century was the capital of needle making, and it has a wonderful museum, Forge Mill Museum, which is a working needle mill.
Yeah.
And I was the curator of the Needle Museum.
Of course you were.
Or as my younger brother Chris put it, the biggest prick in the collection, which I thought was a bit unfair, but I didn't have to put in the car.
We like Chris already.
I'm just getting this stuff in first, but it gave me an insight into different aspects of heritage and the like. But it was apparent that I was never going to stay in museums. I wanted to go back.
So how was it you came to Croatia? How did you get to Croatia? Yeah.
Well, I had because I was, somewhat obsessed with archaeology, as any good archaeologist should be, and been going out to Boeotia to work on the Bradford, Cambridge, Boeotian survey, the Cabbage Project, as it was known. It's an acronym, and I can't remember what it all stood for. You can find out. And John Bintliffe suggested that I might consider doing a PhD, and the opportunity was to go out to Slovenia initially to work on the karst at a place called Rodic. Slovenia, of course, being part of Yugoslavia, one of the republics of Yugoslavia. So I decided to jack in the job, give everything up, and to move out to Slovenia to work with Božidar. The plan, however, to work on the karst, the Slovene karst, came to absolutely nothing for a multitude of reasons. So I was stuck there for some time, having a brilliant time in Slovenia, amongst a wonderful bunch of people, archaeologists, and a couple of British expat archaeologists, Phil Mason most notably, in what we called the English school in Slovenia, which was actually a bar
of
far
course.
from the department. And after a while, when it was realised that whilst I was having a good time, there was not that much progression on my PhD, it was suggested that I might like to go down and have a look at another project run out of Ljubljana with the Split Museum, the Archaeological Museum in Split, with a guy called Branko Kirigan. And I went down. I didn't have that much knowledge of what I was going to be faced with. At any rate, he took me out to the island of Hvar, which may well be known to a lot of people who listen to this as a pretty hot holiday place to go. I was completely unaware of that. At any rate, I went out there. Branko took me to a high place, rather like Satan tempting Christ, and said, "Well, on every hill there is a hill fort. Down there on the Starigrad Plain is a Greek colony with one of the best preserved Greek field systems in Europe. The villas stand to, in some cases, 2 stories high, and it's got loads of wine and lavender. Would you be interested in working on that?" Well, it took about 2 nanoseconds to make that. I mean, it was just stunning. Yeah. And we went. I moved there, and as a precursor to a larger project, it was decided that I would do the foundation work, and my PhD was to pull together the unconsolidated data on all the sites on the island, hundreds of them. So I did this remarkable journey with a guy called Nick Jovanovic and Branko, in which we pretty much walked the length and breadth of this island, left to right and top to bottom, and hundreds of sites at a time which was just remarkable because of the changes that were happening during this period, and how tourism was taking the island over, emptying the interior at that point.
I get, Vince, that we could fill a whole program with the stories that you can take away from the completion of your PhD.
Yes.
You're allowed to pick one story.
Goodness me! I mean, there were literally so many things that happened.
Talk about a van then.
The van, the one I drove down to Hvar with Zoran Stančić, who was my other comrade in arms down there. Yes, it said that. Bearing in mind, I'd only just learned to drive to go out to Yugoslavia, because I thought, well, it's a skill I ought to have, and they said, right, you can drive down with all the kit for this Zastava van, if you remember Zastava, which was flag in Serbo-Croat, and they said, there it is, it's in the yard. And I got into it, and immediately jammed this van in the very small alley going out the back of the departmental house. It took a 3,600 point turn to get me out of this position. I mean, it was touch and go as to whether it would still be there today. I absolutely sure you. Anyway, we headed off over the Dinaric Alps with this van, which was Jerry built in the best of times, and it was only once we started heading over the Dinaric Alps that I really understood that when you pressed the accelerator down to the floor, it stuck, and you actually had to bend down to pull it back up. You know, I mean, it was stunning. I mean, the people were brilliant. The archaeology was brilliant. Yeah. I mean, there was the tragedy of the war, which went down through the whole time. You know, I had the opportunity to go out to uninhabited islands. Yeah. I discovered a horrendous allergy to caterpillars. I had my second near miss with a drunk Croatian and a hand grenade out there. You know, I mean, you know, it was just great. I had a fantastic
It seems hand grenades clearly figure somewhat disturbingly significantly in your life.
Absolutely, loads of times. I mean, generally the military or somewhere around me at any point in time. I am a liability.
well, I shall move on. So tell me, Vince, remote sensing.
How was that? Sorry, Rupert, go on.
No, that's all right.
I mean, it was while you were in Croatia that you made the contacts that put you on the... Oh, really?
We'd started doing... in the first project that I was running with Martin Tinkle, we had these are where contacts with Bradford really started to emerge. Right. My brother had gone there; he was an undergrad, and we felt we had to start doing geophysical surveys on the Roman villas, and we had to borrow a magnetometer and a couple of students to do surveys. One of which was Chris, and Carl Herring, now in the British Museum as undergrads, and we did surveys of the settlement we're on. I mean, I had to virtually promise to give Bradford my younger brother in perpetuity if anything happened to the magnetometer. And it was after doing the survey we said, well, we mollycoddled it around this site doing this survey. We got back into this ugly Saab we used as the gadabout for the project. We got in. We started driving off and said, "Who's got the magnetometer?" They said, "Well, we lent it." Someone said, "Well, I lent it against the car." And we stopped, and it was still back there, right where it had been lent across. And so there was that, and we'd already then used that opportunity to integrate geophysics with surface survey to see the difference. So there was always something there. But the other thing that had happened out in Yugoslavia was that I'd been introduced to using GIS and digital and spatial technologies, because I'd got to the end of what I felt I could do with a paper, a pen, and half a dozen crayons and getting out and doing, field walking or topographic or other survey data. And the integration of digital data, and as geophysics became digitally enabled, was clearly going to be the match made in heaven. So by the time I came back, and by the time that I started working at the Birmingham University Field Archaeology Unit, which was my next job when I got back, the opportunity came to pull it together in a big way at the Roman city of Wroxeter, Vericonium Canoviorum, with Roger White and Simon Budo. And at that point, we took the opportunity to do a whole Roman town. and a big survey around it. We got Leverhulme project to do this, not actually to do the survey itself. We hung lots of little projects off a larger study of urbanization and romanization to do this. But without doubt, the key, the thing which the hinge point for looking at was this huge town dumped in the middle of the Welsh marches, which was almost entirely built on, about which we had, of course, a famous plan done by aerial, from aerial photographs by Philip Barker, but half of it was empty. It was a garden city, and you couldn't. The point was, it wasn't really empty, and we guessed it wasn't empty. It's just you can only see certain things with aerial photographs. But how could you do something about urbanization and romanization if you had a town which appeared to be empty or largely empty? And of course, it was a 78 hectare site. It's the fourth largest defended area in Britain, and we begged everyone we knew across the world to come and work on this site, because we said it's going to be the first, it's going to be really, really important. And we got people turning up who shouldn't have come there, because we were not important enough. The site was great, but we persuaded them. Albert Hess came down, Yasushi Nishimura, Dean Goodman, the great and the good of archaeological geophysics turned up to do a stint at Wroxeter with us, and of course we filled in this town, and filling in the town allowed us to say something about its impact more broadly, and that was a major point. It gave me certainly a bug for doing remote sensing.
Yeah, that's the great thing. I wanted folk to understand, that it's your drive in that area that you've been a pioneer in this area. Sorry, Rupert, I interrupted you earlier, and you were going to ask a specific question.
It's all right. No apology necessary. No, it was really because you're talking about remote sensing, and the fact that you've been so instrumental in its rise, if you like, in archaeology. So, how, as far as you're concerned, how has it opened up archaeology to you personally, and archaeology in general? Remote sensing has changed so much. So, wanted to know what your view was on that.
Well, the first thing is, I was lucky in having a brother who was a real geophysicist.
Yeah.
Fact. And Chris, my brother, and I have worked very closely throughout this. The other point is technology, for me, has always been in the service of archaeology. It has never been the other way around. I've only ever used technology in order to be a better archaeologist and to do things that I thought were interesting for archaeologically. It was never any other way. So that was the driving force. For me, it was answering archaeological questions. As I say, I started off as a Romanist, so I had enough of an interest in getting a full picture of a Roman town in Britain, and I saw that as a major step in contribution both to the research I was doing and to Roman archaeology more broadly. The issues in most cases was how you and of course scale. Almost everything I've done has been interested in has been at a certain scale, and I ultimately have become a landscape archaeologist, which is, a jack of all trades and master of none, but nonetheless,
okay.
But it demands work to be done at a certain scale. Now, we were working in the mid-90s at cityscape scale. And cities and towns are landscapes in their own right. I have no problem about that whatsoever. But it took us over 3 years to do that survey, with big chunks of work, with loads of people. We had hundreds of volunteers on the Wroxeter Hidden Land Project. We ran it as a community project wherever we could, plus all these great people. The magnetometers, we had radar at a point when I started doing this, and Yasushi Nishimura and Dean Goodman were coming to work on this. The person who shall remain nameless rang me up and said, "Well, why are you doing it? Don't you know it doesn't work in Britain?" Well, it did at Wroxeter, and it has since. But the magnetometry plan, which was about the extent of the town and its immediate surroundings, was as large as I could imagine doing at that point. And it was 500,000 data points within that town. And 500,000 data points, you just can't get much bigger than that ever, I bet. Well, of course, this was not how it was to be. And consider what happened, less than a decade after the finishing the Wroxeter Hidden Land Project, and as I was moving gradually, not just into an archaeologist who did geophysics, but had been given the opportunity at Birmingham to found a centre. Well, the centre, I looked at the time, and I was been working particularly with the GIS with the Centre for Advanced Spatial Technologies at the University of Arkansas, CAST, and they were my model for how things would go, except at the point that actually I had the opportunity to do something, because at that point the internet was turning up. We had larger, better compute clusters. And the capacity, really, the change I felt was likely to be visualization rather than GIS, and visualization based on web-based technologies or distributed computing in some format. So we didn't have a CAST, we had a VISTA, a visual technology center at that time, and that was a difference into how I could scale up my own activities.
Inevitably, there's a huge amount that we're going to have to leave out, and I want to kind of move along to the three main things that we remain to talk about. Well, I think Doggerland is massive. Certainly in the most recent years as an area of study, and of course the Stonehenge Hidden Landscape Project. Are there any other projects though that stand out for you? I mean, we were going to. You've talked about Wroxeter, Warren Fields.
Warren Fields, I think, is interesting. Whether people agree with me or not on it,
Okay.
It doesn't, to a certain extent. It doesn't. That does not matter. It was as a consequence of looking at some of the data pit alignments within the Stonehenge, Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project that I started to look at. Well, we picked up Warren Field as a recently published interesting thing, which was a pit alignment, but of Mesolithic date.
Yeah, could you paint a broad picture of what the Warren Field site is? Yeah,
Warren Fields is in Craths in Aberdeen on the Dee. It is a pit alignment, but it's strange. It's formed of a series of pits going from 30-40 centimeters to over 2 meters across, going from small to big to small again, and not in a line but an arc.
Wow,
it's
yeah.
rather like Monty Python's theory of the Brontosaurus would get small, big, and small again. That's what it's like, and it is peculiar. It is it's Mesolithic, which is strange. It's
Yes.
about 8,000 BC, and we were looking at this, and we felt there was something that was worthy of exploration. The excavation was excellent, and by the Murrays up in Aberdeenshire, but we were looking at it, and we the group I was in, we literally looked at that and said, well, it's been printed in portrait format, but it's got an arc. Surely it should be landscape. And when we looked at it and said, well, what's the significance of that? And we shoved it into one of the GIS. We looked at it. The arc was pointing vaguely to the southish, and behind it was a hill slope.
Yeah.
And for a variety of reasons, view sheds have become important to me, and I might come back to that. And we said, well, surely this is, it's an alignment. People say it's an alignment, but you can't have an alignment along an arc. It surely has to be perpendicular. If you turn it, if you look at it perpendicular and think, well, you can't see anything behind you. What's in front? And in front is the Slug Pass, where the midwinter sun rises on the solstice. And we immediately felt this was a monument, as the original excavators had quite correctly said, and we felt that one way or another, this alignment with this particular feature to the south and its astronomic alignment was significant. Now, at that point in time when we were doing that, quite a decade ago, is it now? Can't even remember. A good friend of mine, a physicist, Ron Yorston, we had to rewrite the software to put the astronomic data back to about 8,000 BC, because most of the standard softwares only went back to 4,000, because it's only sedentary societies in the Neolithic who are interested in such stuff. It's not presumed.
Yes. Do you think one of the things that I've been curious about with Warren Fields is it's the fact that its location in Aberdeenshire? Do you think there is any relationship between the recumbent stone circles, specifically in Aberdeenshire, that here you have the oldest known astronomical monument, as you say, in Britain, and it's in the one place that we have recumbent stone circles? Do you think there's a connection?
I think they're too far apart to be so. And there's an interesting point about the Warren Field alignment as it is, which I think is significant at a much greater level, and that's the fact it doesn't appear in that form. If you look at the C14 dates, which are very well collected, it takes hundreds of years to get that the form it does. Now, we made a connection with the potential for lunar observation as well, but the point is that whatever caused that point to become significant, it couldn't have been it wasn't necessarily the reason it became the form it did, because it took hundreds of years. Now, this I genuinely think is something people are going to have to understand about the nature of monuments, which is monuments grow. They don't spring eternal in the form they have. And there's the process that I think is involved here is stigmagy, which is a self-creating process built originally coming from animal behavior, and for how termites create structures. Once something happens, the structure is built from it, but there's no sense of planning. And I suspect an awful lot of our larger complexes grow this way. And they give the impression of order. Yes. Because something has already happened and things cascade and meaning is accreted around these structures in that way.
Yeah.
It is very different. I suspect most major, so-called ritual complexes have that or initialized in that way, I suspect. So Warren Fields is interesting because, one, it's early and it's relatively simple, and we can see that processes like this actually take place. It seems to me a bit rational, so presumably wrong.
Sure.
But it's in there. So that's significant. But I'd also like to point out one other project which is linked to pretty much everything, and that was the Stonehenge Landscapes Project, which I did with Alan Woodred, Sally Exon, and Ron Yorston again, and that I still think was a brilliant project. At the point possibly too technical techie for archaeologists and too archaeological for techies in some ways. But when Anne Woodward, over a beer, suggested that we look at the data that she published with her husband Pete Woodward on the distribution of barrows in what appeared to be circular arrangements around Stonehenge, was quite a seminal point for me, because I looked at it and I said, well, in the first instance, I'm not sure about the circular arrangement as circles. I felt that there was some sort of topographic effect in work there, and we agreed to start working on it, looking at initially the view shed of Stonehenge, which of course we've got the envelope, the visual territory of Stonehenge, which is surrounded by barrows, which gives that effect of an arrangement around it.
And this is the Stonehenge Landscape Project, as distinct from the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project.
Yes, it was an earlier one. This was done at the late 90s and published in 2000. But we then started going bigger and bigger and saying, well, what about the rest? There's meant to be other arrangements. At which point, with particularly with Sally Exon, we were mass producing view sheds for everything, for up to 1,200 monuments and bits in between. Wow. We generated, I think, 60,000 view sheds for this project. And the other point was Ron Yorston, who, again, the guy who'd rewritten the software for astronomic purposes up at Warren Field. Because we were working apart, Ron worked in the oil and gas industry, and he was based in Reading, and Anne was down in Wiltshire, Dorset rather, and we were up in Birmingham. He wrote at a very early stage a set of applets, these mini applications in Java, which would run over the web, so we could all look at these things simultaneously as we were looking at them. And eventually, what we ended up with was interactive maps which explored every point on the landscape, which had movement embedded. It had sound and impressions of landscapes embedded, and panoramic data with all the sites laid on it, either as photographs or as relatively crude 3D terrains, all of which was available to anyone looking at the data. And I don't think that's ever been achieved since, actually. It's just the sad point is that as Microsoft changed Windows, and eventually you couldn't run the software, of course. But Ron Yorston can, and that's all that's important. But nonetheless, it brought into view that most large chunks of this landscape was structured by site. Yeah. And you could, that was definitive.
Yeah.
What it meant is different, of course, but there is a structuring process which gave the impression of circles and arcs within the landscape. And it wasn't just Stonehenge; it was multiple centres around points around the landscape, which were giving that impression. Well, it's not an impression; the landscape is structured, but it also goes back to, I think, the comments of earlier, in that once you've got a point, the appearance of structures around it emerges because that point is there. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing.
I'm glad you said exactly that, because I'm not sure that so many of our audience will be quite aware how much structural detail that there is available and that you've been examining over the past years in the Stonehenge landscape. We'll come back to that with the Hidden Landscape Project, and of course, focus of what we'll finish up with is the discovery of the pits. But in the meantime, tell us about Doggerland.
Well, Doggerland's an interesting one because it is one of the things that you can actually say sprang from a master's set of lectures, because I used to do a session on landscapes you can't do anything with at Birmingham in the master's landscape course, and one of them always was the lands underneath the North Sea, becoming known or popularised as Doggerland by Bryony Coles. And, right in the middle of it is the so-called Lamananua Point, which was dragged up in the 30s. The Clinder Point, on the Lamananua banks in the 30s by the trawler, the Calinda, with Pilgrim E. Lockwood, the wonderfully named skipper of the boat, and back in the 30s, which was picked up by Graham Clark and went to was well known in the literature as being the evidence for this area being populated rather than just a stretch of sea.
We're talking about the harpoon here, aren't we?
Yes, it's probably from a fish spear or something like that. Actually, there have been a bundle of these things tied together to get fish, or eels or whatever. We've known that there was a landscape out there for certainly since the beginning of the 20th century. Clement Reid, the great geologist botanist, had put this forward in his book on prehistoric fossil forests in the area around the coastline, said there has to be something out there, just has to be. We just don't know anything about it. And it might be about the period of the pyramids, so we might find a scarab or so and then date it. There was no unfair to him, there's no dating evidence to go on at the time. But we did this, and we had there's one of the master's students, a guy called Simon Fitch, said, who'd come from a geology course here, said, what about oil and gas data? And we sat down, we had a talk, and we said, what about oil and gas data? All we need is someone who knows what oil and gas data looks like, and who can also introduce us to people in the oil and gas sector to perhaps help us. And there was a guy called Ken Thompson who had previously, as it turned out, taught Simon. And so we went along to see him, and he said, well, yeah, why not? Well, let's have a go. It was only sometime later that he admitted that he'd misunderstood what we'd asked him, because if he had, he'd have told us to go away, because he'd presumed that we were talking about the Paleolithic and the deeper sectors of habitable areas, because at that point in time, the seismic columns, which we were talking about, the big geophysical surveys done by large boats using, some sonic sources, which are collected rather like radar data. The top of the column, the water column, and the seabed face generally was never, it couldn't be interpreted for a variety of reasons, but that was decided as a fact in the 60s, really. And no one had really gone back and said, well, computing has gone on a bit and visualization of this data has improved. And it had become a factoid that you couldn't look at the point we were interested in, which was not that far below the surface of the seabed, down to about 16 meters.
And what is it about your studies? What's come out of your data, of the oil and gas data that you've used, that's been able to inform your thoughts about, how the Doggerland was populated and all that? Yeah.
Yes. Well, the first, initially nothing, and I'll say that because initially we thought we'll be able to get the if we can get anything about topography, then we're onto it. We got the data. The oil and gas companies didn't throw us out because they knew Ken Thompson, the basin geomorphologist we worked on, is the only reason we got to the door, never mind through it. And they said, yeah, we know him, we don't know you, but we'll only give you a small bit of data to work on. And they said, and we won't give you any more than 6,000 square kilometers. No more. And because I went back and literally within a week we've got the first river on the top of the Dogger Bank.
Good.
I mean, honestly, we've got the image of it, that first river. We later named it the Shotton River after the great geologist, Bytham River and all that stuff.
Really? Okay, yeah.
And at that point, we knew we could start generating real maps of a prehistoric landscape that we had never seen before and was probably very well preserved, right?
Yeah.
We did the first project on 25,000 square kilometers, about the size of Wales, in 18 months, and got it pretty much to publication.
That's amazing.
It was stunning.
Yeah.
But we only had a map. It was an ordnance survey map of hundreds of rivers, lakes, hills, without any people in.
Yeah.
And without any prospective people. But what we had always planned was if we could find the rivers, if we could find the streams, we had the clue to the sediment caches, we could go and find data in. It was always planned.
What kind of data? What kind of data, Vince, can you find in the sediments?
The data was going to initially be paleo-environmental data, because if you've got the shape of the land, here I'm a landscape archaeologist, if you can clothe it with environmental data, you will be able to find the areas that are most likely to be inhabited or where activities concentrate to the extent that you are likely to be able to find evidence of human populations, and it will be so easy. That was the plan. Well, it took us quite a lot. We finished the second. Well, we did a number of phases. NOAA, the American National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, gave us money to do the eastern sector. So, we I can't remember, we had about 40,000 kilometers of landscape at that point. And it took us a while after that until we could do something else. Now, in the interim, I'd started talking to geneticists at Birmingham about the possibility of using sedimentary DNA to give to look directly at sediments along with traditional paleoenvironmental data in order to get a better insight. It was uncertain we'd be able to use that, but we did a pilot project at Goldner Cliff, Britain's only submerged Mesolithic site,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we got this I admit contentious product which actually had wheat in at 6000 BC, which is not meant to be there clearly. But we can't, we have not been able to falsify that data. Anyway, I mean,
Okay.
it's deeply buried. It's beneath 10 to 15 kilometers of marine sediment. It's on a rise above paleo channels, so sheet wash might, I suppose, be something, but didn't look likely. But it showed, one thing it showed, whether you liked it or whether you agreed with that or not, was that DNA was being preserved at an early date. And if you were able to get the caches of sediment, and which had been preserved rapidly, and that's what transgression does, you should be able to apply this. At this point, I was working with Robin Albee in Warwick University. We then had all the pieces in place to do something much bigger.
Yeah.
And in 2015, we were lucky enough to be given a European advanced grant, one of these blue sky grants, 2.5 million.
Wow.
And that gave us the option of pulling together a major team of paleoenvironmentalists, seismologists, computer modelers to work together on reconstructing the landscape in a big way. We had the money to send ships out to sea and to collect 100-odd cores going down the valleys that we knew about, because the valleys are time machines. The further down you go, the older they are, and they're being inundated, so they're being sealed.
Yeah.
So we
Vince,
have a strategy.
I'm very conscious of the time romping on, because we could genuinely talk about Doggerland on its own. We could talk about for
or sedimentary
hours.
DNA. Who knew?
Or indeed sedimentary DNA. And
Well, I mean, if we just stop and say, it's working.
Yeah.
The first thing is, at an environmental level, we appear to have got the Storegga tsunami deposit, the furthest south we've ever come across. That's just been published. And more importantly, was we went prospecting for flint or lithics or artifacts in the areas that we believe they would be most likely found. And we've got lithics from the seabed.
Yes.
That's taken 15 years to get to that point. I mean, it has been a long, and it was planned, as long as we got money.
Sure. I think the whole thing about revelations from Doggerland, it's just the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? The information that will continue to come from that is extraordinary, really. But coming back to the Stonehenge landscape and everything that's been in the news of late. So tell us your most recently published work with the enormous pits that were discovered there. First of all, how were the pits discovered in the first place?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to say that in 2007, we'd realized that that terrestrial geophysics had come to a tipping point, and that we could use multi-sensor arrays with GPS controls. And we'd said, I remember discussing this with Mike Parker Pearson, saying, Mike, what we want to do again, top to bottom, left to right, do the lot, find out what's in between the monuments. And we couldn't do it at that point, but in 2010, we had a mega collaborative project with the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute in Vienna with Wolfgang Neubauer, and there was a pan-European consortium who pooled their resources into a geophysical circus, which literally went from project to project to project, national projects within Europe, and there were multiple multi-sensor arrays. I think at some point we had five or six magnetometers with 6 or 8 arrays collecting data at 20 to 30 kilometers an hour, being immediately georeferenced over the whole area. And to the point that, we had 12 or 13 square kilometers of seamless terrestrial geophysics surrounding Stonehenge. Now, in about 2012 to 13, we were moving up towards Durrington Walls. Now, Durrington had been surveyed by Mike Parker Pearson Bournemouth. Not a problem, great survey. But we wanted to do this area so that we could have the same technology applied across it. That was the reason we were doing it. Now, we'd already famously, of course, found these as a consequence of using radar, which had not been applied, seen these massive features underneath the banks.
Yes.
Now, we thought they were stones. Fess up, we were wrong, but they were rammed full of chalk to the extent they looked like stones, and they did, and we'd never seen anything like this. But, the consequence of that was it was a major change to the monument that we'd got. There must have been several hundred of these massive posts underlying the banks. Now, that in itself was significant. But further away from this, it took us a while to catch up with our data, with our own data. I mean, we'd collected we'd exceeded the data that we'd collected over years at Wroxeter within the first 2 weeks of work. Goodness. I mean, it was going that fast. Now, at that point, we'd seen these big features. We'd seen 3 or 4 of them. 3. And I looked at them. I remember I said, "Well, I don't know what they are, but they might be dew ponds. They form a strange shape. But there might be dew ponds. Where on the chalk where there's no surface water, you create artificial ponds lined with puddles or with hay, and you provide water for sheep. 18th, 19th century generally. And I thought, well, there could be dew ponds because they're very big, 20 meters across. And I can't think of anything else. Otherwise, the fail-safe around Stonehenge, if it's not ritual, it's the military. They've done something weird and wacky, and we don't know anything about it. Yeah. So it was left that way until we noticed that there were some very similar features to the north of Durrington. Now, do remember, these things were so far away from either Stonehenge or Durrington. There was no reason to associate them. There was no reason to associate.
Yeah, gotcha.
And it was only when we realised there was something very similar to the north that had been done by Wessex. We thought, we'll go back and have a look at these things. And at that point, just getting the data, we realised there weren't 3 or 4. There were 9 of them, stretching from the just above the Avon, in a huge arc around the south of Durrington and moving towards the western side. And we thought, that is weird. And then we gathered into the grey literature that Wessex had, and we got help from Matt Lever in Wessex, and realised that, initially we'd seen 1 or 2 of these things, but they had 5 or 6 of them all around the north. We then started looking at the gaps. We found some others, and it seemed to us quite apparent that there was a massive circle around it, around Durrington at the centre. Now, at that point, we thought, this was a bit of a jaw-dropping moment when we started looking at this. The team started looking at this, and we said, we're going to have to go back and have a look at this because, quite a lot of my career, as I think is obvious, is at the edge of things. Yeah. I do tend to operate a bit at the edge. Get some things wrong, get some things right. That's what happens when you work at the edges.
Yeah, at margins.
Yeah, I think so. And I thought, I don't want to do what happened at the earlier phases of Durrington. What if these things are just some lunatic military venture? It's just happened to be around Durrington, and we thought right, and we're going to go back. We plan to go back, and we're going to have a look at these. None of these had been covered with radar, just magnetometry. So we went back, and we also went back with a vibrocore to look in the centre. we did the survey of the radar. Radar was brilliant. It showed that there was a weathering cone at the top, but that there was a 10-meter circle which just went straight vertical edges. But we couldn't see further than 3 meters. After that, the antennae could not resolve the bottoms, which has been a problem throughout the period of worked around Stonehenge. But of course we got the vibrocore. August last year was one of the driest periods on record. It was like concrete. We couldn't go further than 30 centimeters into the topsoil. It was just not possible. This thing. Goodness. So we went away. We have colleagues, from Lambeth and St Andrews and Birmingham, and I begged some more money off the research fund at Bradford, on the grounds that this is going to be worth it. Just trust me. I'm good bloke, And we got a mechanical auger. And it's got a 65 kilo head on it, and it just went straight through. And of course, these things all bottomed at about 5 meters.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're saying, well, that looks. I mean, they all look the same in plan. They're all looking the same in terms of depth. We got a couple of dates. One of them was Middle Bronze Age, and that's a separate point to think about. And the other was Middle Neolithic, 2400, and that gave us right at the bottom of one of the pit shafts. Call it what you will. It's difficult to know when a pit becomes a shaft in these things. And now Stonehenge has a lot of big features around it.
Yeah.
You have, of course, spoken about one of them, the Wilsford shaft.
Indeed.
You have indeed. So there's a tradition of digging big crazy holes in the ground around here. So, but the extent of these things, the arrangement of them, was clearly going to be unique. Now, it is quite possible that some of these begin as solution features, but even if they are appropriated into a much larger structure itself. They all look the same. There's only one which looks slightly different, and I think it's been truncated. So you've got this circle of massive shafts, 10 meters across. I mean, I always say to people, pace out 10 meters in your room, look up, and then add another story onto your roof, and you'll get an idea of the scale.
The other confirming factor to the circle is that the Larkhill
the Larkhill enclosure
that
came out as we were working through these things, that the circle, as it touched on the northern side, and these things approached the newly discovered Larkhill enclosure. That's how we were working with Matt Lever. I mean, they come right up to the edge closest to Durrington Walls. There is also some evidence for a palisade or a post alignment, a pit alignment on the inside of all these pits as well. You've got it to the north around the inside the pits that Wessex exposed up to the causewayed enclosure, and we have it on 1/4 of the alignment until it goes into a what's called a head deposit, solifluction deposit, where we can't see small features. We can only see the big things. So everything ties together. You're right. What do you do deal with this? And this is a problem area, as Warren Field showed, and how you interpret these things. But the thing is clearly approximating a circle, and the circle appears to be dictated by the distance to the causeway enclosure. Now, however you look at that does seem, again, the appropriation of a much earlier monument, 1,000 years or so earlier, into a big structure. The structure itself contains 3 square kilometres of land.
Yes.
If you exclude the area over the Avon, there's no reason to believe you go beyond the Avon. But this is a mega area of land. But it's approximating that, and you can't help but suggest that the significant point is the causewayed enclosure and the distance. And that's the reflection of the distance all the way around. Now, it's not a perfect circle, which is why we started to look at how, what these distances meant. And I ran a simple cost distance surface from Durrington to the causewayed enclosure, and then compared all the pits to it. The energy cost of walking from the pit from Durrington to the causewayed enclosure, and then compare it to all the pits around it. Well, the northern side, it's very closely aligned, massively closely aligned to either the cost distance or the notional circle. And the reason for that is that you can see the causewayed enclosure from the pits to the north. So you've got 2 points of reference, either where you're walking from and what you're meant to be aligned with. That's fine, but it's not the same on the south and the southwest in particular. And when we started looking at that, the alignment actually coincides with the energy cost, but the energy cost is different as you walk to the south and the southwest because the land's flatter.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the implication of that is that they're pacing the thing out because you're using the same energy cost to go to all the pits. But when you can't see the causewayed enclosure,
I see.
But you're still using the same number of steps, and you always walk your step is longer when you're on the flat than it is up or down. It's good. But the implication of that is they're counting. They have to be able to count because you can't see one side to the other of this from these pits to the other side of the circle. And in most cases, you can't see Durrington Walls either because there's rises in between. There's a valley to the north. You can't see the Larkhill Causeway enclosure from Durrington. So you have to have some way of tallying something to get this approximation of distance. Now, that has quite a few implications in terms of how we believe these people are operating. One, they've clearly got some element of a cosmological belief, I think, in there, but also they are using their capacity to tally at least to create a notional space in which they're inscribing that distance into the ground with these massive pits. Now, that's something, but that there are other points about that which are very important. We say tally, we say count, but that's not necessarily how it was in the past.
Sure.
There are plenty of ethnographic comparisons with societies who count and tally, but they don't do it for the reasons we do it. We have an abstract approach to maths. It allows us to do things in a formal way. They don't necessarily have it. Counting and tallying may be done for social reasons. It may be done for counting genealogies back to mythical ancestors, how close you are, therefore how important you are, or counting the numbers of pigs you've killed in the feast, possibly important at Durrington, in which you can show how important you are, in a conspicuous consumption sort of way, But so it has, those observations have significance.
What direction do you think it's going to take us? You have your own feeling for it, but I mean, the line of inquiry it opens up is fascinating.
Absolutely. The first thing, though, is you can approximate a why in what we're doing here, but you can't approximate the what, which is what these things were actually doing. Now, there's a number of points about that. The first is, where's all the chalk gone?
Oh,
These things took out about 300 cubic meters of chalk. Now, most mounds of chalk in this area, quite a lot of them are still there, but they're not here. Okay. So they're going somewhere. You know, is that the is it going into the holes for those huge pits, or is it going into the henge?
Yeah,
I don't think we've got a strong enough chronology there at the moment, but we need, that's the sort of thing we've got to think. And the other, which is the big problem, is we're relying on a 4-inch core to look at a 10-meter diameter, 5-meter deep pit. Now, if you look at comparative structures, and Mountain up Wimborne, the Martin Green site, with that great big pit which was surrounded by posts, it's earlier than these, but it's approximately the same size, not quite as deep, but in one corner it had a 7-meter shaft. You could have significant features inside these things.
Yes.
I mean, we just don't know. I mean, that takes me back to a technical point. I was discussing this with Richard Bradley when I was talking this through, is we need a Neolithic big things project because in geophysical
make it so.
At least I've got the title. We are not good at being able to visualize large structures of that sort. And there are more of them around than we think. The issues of pits. The pits have always been with us, like the poor,
big and small,
exactly. But we're going to, which is one of the points about the rest of the survey. There are a lot of big pits in there, and some of them are clearly significant. And the point also about the larger survey, which you have to go back to, is it was done also to find not just where things were, but where they weren't. The absence of evidence of the landscape had become evidence of absence to an extent, because no one knew what was in there, and we couldn't make any sense of it. The point about what's happened at Durrington is you can start to join the dots in a way we've never been able to do. We had found that structure years ago, but we didn't know what it was until we had this larger context. We couldn't join those dots. Well, there's a lot of dots to join in the Stonehenge landscapes.
A hell of a lot. Have you got? Are there plans to actually excavate any of them fully?
Well, that's a major undertaking, and there's huge. I think it's a huge undertaking. But there's also we do have. I think we've also got to think about whether we can explore them digitally, technically, before we do that. And the fact that we haven't got them all doesn't mean they're not all there.
Of course.
Or at least it doesn't mean that some more of them aren't. But I think there is a rationale to make sure that we can find all the ones that are findable first. And I think that's important. And to see what we can do about assisting with technology in order to look at them non-invasively as well. Because there are variations in those features, and I'd like to know. It's better to be prepared. That's another good thing geophysics gives you. It doesn't tell you exactly what things are. Again, we've got some things right, we've got some things wrong. It is like that. It's only a science up until the point you interpret something. That is the truth.
Sure.
So there's a phased approach. I mean, it took us 15 years to get to where we were with Doggerland, but and I think that is not a crazy comparison about how to deal with some of these things. So the Durrington shafts are clearly important. They have implications in terms of how how we view not just Durrington but also Stonehenge, in the sense that the binary position of Stonehenge, which is, Mike Parker Pearson has undoubtedly put forward, becomes more of a stark contrast with these structures. Now we also, we've also only got one date at the moment, and that's also problematic.
Okay.
The other, that's significant. So but nonetheless, the two sites appear to have more coherence now than they had before, I think, in terms of the envelope as a territory and the shafts as a territory themselves. But we'd like to obviously get a firm position to put those within.
Yeah. Well, a coherent, a gathering of coherence is probably a good way to start rounding up, as the time has got the better of us, Vince. We really could talk to you all afternoon, but it's just fascinating. There is so much. We're just going to be waiting for any more, any further results that you're going to be putting out into the wider world. It's an extraordinary piece of work that you've been doing there. It really is.
And I hope people have got a sense of Professor Vincent Gaffney MBE as being at the forefront of the studies that have enabled these results to come out, for the vast majority of his career. So I just wanted to plant that, for people to understand. Okay, no matter what you might.
You can always just send me money.
Yeah, that would have worked too.
Vincent, it has been a joy. Thank you so much for joining us. It really, there's an awful lot to chew on.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. Thank you for watchers, our audience, our Patreon folk, and our larger YouTube audience. Thank you for being with us. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, folks.
Take care, folks. Bye.